Hello again, curious minds of the world. Welcome back to Old News, the podcast where yesterday's headlines still have something to say. Today, we're spinning the dial to the year 1950, a year that saw the dawn of a new war, the birth of new fears, and the quiet beginnings of movements and technologies that would shape the decades to come. Let's begin in Washington, D.C., where President Harry S. Truman made a defining decision. In January, he authorized the development of the hydrogen bomb, a weapon much more powerful than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A-bombs use nuclear fission, splitting heavy atoms like uranium-235 or plutonium-239 to release immense energy. H-bombs, or thermonuclear weapons, use fission to trigger nuclear fusion, the same process powering the sun, by fusing light atoms like hydrogen isotopes. Fusion releases far more energy than fission, making H-bombs up to 1,000 times more powerful than A-bombs. This escalated the arms race with the Soviet Union, setting the stage for the nuclear brinkmanship that would define the decades ahead. Meanwhile, Klaus Fuchs, a German-born British physicist who had worked on the Manhattan Project, triggered a major U.S. espionage investigation. Fuchs admitted to passing atomic bomb secrets to the Soviets, leading investigators to American courier Harry Gold. Gold's confession implicated David Greenglass, a machinist at Los Alamos, who in turn accused his brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg, of recruiting him into a Soviet spy ring. Julius was arrested in June of 1950 in New York. When he refused to cooperate, authorities also arrested his wife, Ethel, 2 months later, hoping to pressure him into confessing, but both steadfastly denied involvement. Listen to episode 1953 for the rest of the story. Another battle was also just beginning, one over fear itself. In February, a little-known senator from Wisconsin, Joseph McCarthy, gave a speech in Wheeling, West Virginia, claiming he had a list of over 200 communists working in the U.S. State Department. That number would change frequently and was never substantiated, but the damage was done. His speech ignited a nationwide anti-communist crusade, giving birth to the era we now call McCarthyism. It was a time of blacklists, loyalty oaths, and hearings that would ruin reputations and careers, particularly in Hollywood, academia, and government. The phrase, "Are you now or have you ever been?" became a chilling refrain in a country struggling to balance freedom and fear. His name would go on to define an entire era, with his aggressive, fear-mongering campaign to expose alleged communists in government, and Hollywood gained momentum. Better dead than red wasn't just a slogan, it was a way of life. But where the world was changing most abruptly was in Korea. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces, backed by the Soviet Union and later China, crossed the 38th parallel, launching a surprise invasion of South Korea. Within days, the North had captured Seoul and was pushing southward fast. The United Nations, led by the United States, responded almost immediately. Under the command of General Douglas MacArthur, American troops were deployed to Korea, marking the start of the Korean War, the first major armed conflict of the Cold War. This wasn't just a regional skirmish. It was a flashpoint in a global ideological battle between communism and capitalism. The war would last 3 years, claiming millions of lives and setting the tone for U.S. military policy in the Cold War era. It was also the first war to be fought under the flag of the United Nations, bringing together soldiers from 21 nations in defense of South Korea. Puerto Rico also stood at a political crossroads. In July, the U.S. Congress passed a law allowing Puerto Rico to draft its own constitution, paving the way for Commonwealth status and greater self-governance. But not everyone welcomed the change. In October, Puerto Rican nationalists launched armed uprisings in towns like Jayuya and Utuado, demanding full independence. The U.S. responded with military force, even bombing Jayuya to suppress the revolt. Days later, two nationalists attempted to assassinate President Truman in Washington. One fatally shot a police officer who, before dying, returned fire, killing one attacker. The other was wounded and captured. Truman was unharmed, but the events revealed deep divisions over Puerto Rico's future. In the civil rights movement, 1950 also saw the start of what would become a landmark Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education. While the decision wouldn't come until 1954, the groundwork was being laid as Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund gathered families willing to challenge segregation in public schools. One of those families was the Browns of Topeka, Kansas. Their daughter, Linda Brown, would become the face of a case that helped redefine American education. Also, integration in the U.S. military was actively underway, following Truman's executive order in 1948 to desegregate it, marking a crucial early step in the broader movement. Now let's go to a chilling mystery that unfolded over the dark waters of Lake Michigan. On the night of June 23rd, Northwest Orient Flight 2501, a Douglas DC-4 airliner en route from New York to Seattle, vanished without a trace. The plane was carrying 58 people, including crew, when it encountered a violent thunderstorm near Benton Harbor, Michigan. The pilot requested a lower altitude due to turbulence, but air traffic controllers denied the request because of traffic in the area. Moments later, the plane disappeared from radar and was never seen again. Despite an extensive search by the Coast Guard, Navy, and local boats, only scattered debris and human remains were found floating on the lake. The main wreckage was never recovered. At the time, it was the deadliest commercial airline disaster in U.S. history, and it remains one of the most haunting unsolved aviation mysteries. To this day, modern search teams continue to comb the lake floor, but so far, Flight 2501 remains lost beneath the freshwater waves. And television was on the rise with the launch of several key programs, including The George Burns and Gracie Allen Show and Your Show of Shows, starring Sid Caesar and Imogene Coca, bringing sketch comedy and variety to millions of living rooms. TV sets were still pricey, but more than 9 million American households now had one, a number that would double in just a few years. At the movies, Cecil B. DeMille's Samson and Delilah was a box office hit, but it was Sunset Boulevard that stole the spotlight with its dark, noirish take on faded fame in Hollywood. The haunting performance of Gloria Swanson as Norma Desmond helped cement the film's legacy as one of the greats. In music, the seeds of rock and roll were being planted, while crooners like Perry Como and Nat King Cole still topped the charts. Rhythm and blues records by artists like Ruth Brown and Wynonie Harris were making waves, especially among younger, more diverse audiences. You couldn't hear it on every station just yet, but change was in the air and on the airwaves. In science, Alan Turing published one of his most important papers, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, where he posed the now famous question, can machines think? Introducing the idea of what we now call the Turing test. His work laid the intellectual foundation for artificial intelligence. Yes, the very kind helping you listen to this podcast today. In other literature, Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles imagined space exploration and human colonization of Mars as a mirror for earthly problems like war, prejudice, and environmental destruction. And C.S. Lewis, an Oxford scholar and theologian, published a children's book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the first in what would become known as the Chronicles of Narnia. The story begins with four siblings, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy Pevensie, who are evacuated from wartime London to the English countryside. There, Lucy stumbles upon a mysterious wardrobe that serves as a portal to Narnia, a snow-covered land frozen in eternal winter by the evil White Witch. As the children become entangled in a battle between good and evil, they meet mythical creatures, talking animals, and the great lion Aslan, a Christ-like figure who sacrifices himself to save Edmund and ultimately defeats the witch. While the book was written for children, it's rich in Christian allegory, mythology, and moral symbolism. Lewis drew from his own faith, his love of fantasy, and classical literature to create a world that felt both ancient and timeless. Initially met with modest success, the book would grow in popularity through the decades, becoming a cornerstone of children's fantasy literature. Lewis would go on to publish 6 more Narnia books over the next few years, expanding the world into a sweeping saga of creation, redemption, and final judgment. It would eventually sell over 100 million copies, be translated into more than 40 languages, and inspire countless adaptations for radio, stage, film, and television. But it all began in 1950, with a wardrobe, a lamppost, and a land where it was always winter, but never Christmas. In sports, the Philadelphia Phillies, nicknamed the Whiz Kids for their youth, won the National League pennant, but lost the World Series to the New York Yankees. In golf, a young Ben Hogan made a miraculous comeback after a near-fatal car crash, winning the U.S. Open in one of the most inspiring stories in sports history. And the Big Ten Conference, then also known as the Western Conference, underwent a significant change when it officially added Michigan State University as its 10th member, replacing the University of Chicago, which had withdrawn from Big Ten football in 1939 and from the conference entirely in 1946. Michigan State had long been a football rival to the University of Michigan and had built a strong athletic program, making it a natural fit. The school began conference play in football in 1953, but the invitation and official expansion happened in 1950, restoring the Big Ten to 10 full members and giving the conference its modern, enduring name. And finally, in the world of toys, the Magic 8-Ball hit store shelves for the first time. Modeled after a spirit-writing device used by psychics, it became a novelty sensation. The answers weren't always accurate, but then again, neither are most predictions. So that was 1950, a year where the Cold War turned hot, the Red Scare took hold, some battles were fought with bullets, others with ideas, and the dawn of the decade that would redefine modern life. In the words of Winston Churchill, "Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." Thanks for joining us on Old News. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.